and welcome to our podcast where we read the Bible and discuss its religious, historical, and cultural significance. I'm your host, Andrew, along with your co-host, Stephen.
Hello.
And today's a special episode. The last 6 episodes, if you haven't listened to them already, we covered 1 day of the creation per episode, so 6 days, 6 episodes. So feel free to check those out if you haven't already. And today we're sort of wrapping it up. We're done with Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to go back and talk about issues involving perhaps more than 1 day, or just talk about things that didn't get talked about in the last 6 episodes, including some other things about how we feel about it or how we perceive it. So it's kind of a special episode. It's also our last episode in the Tanakh for right now, because we're going to start doing the Renewed Covenant or New Testament in tandem with the Old Testament. So next episode should be starting off with the New Testament, so look forward to that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, because I am the atheist on the show, and I haven't really been forceful with my atheism the last 6 episodes, and I'm not really going to be that forceful with it here, but I've kind of just sort of not mentioned it. You know, I've been going along with the flow, and just trying to learn and absorb and think about these things without bringing my own bias into it. But one of the things that Stephen and I decided that we wanted to talk about some more was evolution. We didn't feel like we gave it enough of a fair shake, because Genesis 1, or just Genesis in general, is the lion's share of where that controversy is at. It's not likely to creep into too much more of the Bible, so if we're going to talk about it, we should talk about it more here. And I just wanted to talk about where my viewpoint comes from, why I believe what I believe, and that really starts with the scientific method and having a scientific outlook. And it's not that you can't be a believer and a scientist. There are plenty of people who are. It's just that I think that science sets a high standard. So when it comes to things that are scientific, and that doesn't mean the high standard in terms of better standard, it's just it's a very specific standard. And I sort of am very conservative about what I believe outside of that. So there's often a lot of misconceptions about what science is, what science isn't, even among scientists sometimes. But the basic idea that you should take away is that science, or one of the things I want to talk about, is that science doesn't prove anything. There is no absolute truth in science. It's not the same sort of way that people know other things, right? And because of that, there's some things that science just can't talk about. Science can't cover. There are certain domains of knowledge. There are certain domains of, some people might call it spirituality or whatever, that it's not applicable because it sets itself into a narrow category of things that it can look at. So sometimes people use that the wrong way and say, well, if it's not scientific, then it must be wrong. And I don't take that view, but I do take the view that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if the extraordinary evidence isn't there, I tend to not discredit it. It's not that I say it's wrong, or it doesn't exist. I prefer to say, I don't know. And I'm just not going to take a position on it. Or I may find that it's unlikely. So in science, what you do is you come up with a hypothesis, but that hypothesis must be falsifiable. If it's not falsifiable, it can't be science. So that is the biggest limiting factor right there. God, anything to do with God, could never be scientific. There's no way to falsify God. So it's just irrelevant. It's not that it's right or wrong, or that science says God exists or doesn't exist. Anytime you hear people have debates where they say they've proven God, it's all nonsense in some sense, because it's just not applicable. You know, God and faith is not applicable to that kind of reasoning. It's not applicable to that kind of logical outlook. And so when you have a theory, like the theory of gravity or the theory of evolution, for example, which we want to talk about, it's not that science has proven that evolution is true. It's that evolution as a hypothesis is falsifiable. and it's been scrutinized and put to a test, a falsifiable test, over and over and over again, and it's passed every time. If it ever fails that test, even once, then you have to throw it out. That's the way it works. So it's not that things are proven to be true, it's that they can't be proven to be not true, or at least they haven't been proven to be untrue yet. And there are plenty of controversies in science, but usually the controversies exist between people who are not in the scientific community. Isaac Newton was a genius by most accounts, I won't deny that. His laws of motion, calculus, he gave innumerable, but seemingly innumerable contributions to math and science, but they weren't 100% accurate. They were accurate enough, and they've gotten us a long way. His ideas about physics got us to the moon, for example. Even though Einstein had already come around and his theories had sort of superseded Newton's, the reference frames in which we live are so close to those that Newton dealt with that his laws still worked. And that's the thing. It's in certain reference frames, Newton laws work just fine. It's when you get into the extreme cases that they don't work. And so Einstein's theories work nicely in all reference frames, and that's why they've superseded Newton's. But they don't work well at all scales. We still haven't figured out how to incorporate gravity into quantum mechanics. And someday that may happen, and a new theory will supersede Einstein. It doesn't make Einstein wrong, and Einstein didn't make Newton wrong in the sense that it was completely untrue. It's not this kind of binary true or false, right or wrong. It's more of subtle shades of truth, getting closer to the truth, having things which make a bigger statement, which say more about the universe, which say more about the world we live in, that can't be shown to be untrue. That's really what it's about. So, science, again, can't prove things true. It can only show us that explanations for the world we live in are not untrue, if that makes sense. There's a great Sherlock Holmes quote, and I kind of wish I had it here in front of me, but it says something like, once you've eliminated all the other possibilities, the only one that remains, no matter how ridiculous, must be the truth. And that's sort of how science works. Once you've removed all other falsifiable claims, the only one left that hasn't been falsified, that's the one you go with. And you just keep hoping that the refinements get better and better all along. It's like having a dartboard. You're never going to hit the bullseye, but you just keep walking the darts in, getting closer and closer all the time. There are certain things that you can't apply that type of reasoning to. Relationships, love, God, etc. Some things you can't get around. If I want to deal with my wife and my relationship with her or my family members, I have to take a stance on that. I can't just ignore it. But when it comes to God, I can't ignore it, basically. And when I say ignore it, what I mean is, I don't know whether there's a God, and I can't know, and there's no way to falsify the God hypothesis, if you want to call it that. And unlike my relationship with my wife, whether God exists or not doesn't affect me. It might affect me if I believed certain things about God and heaven and heaven and hell and things like that, but there's no way to falsify those either. And so I simply choose to ignore them. It's not that I, as an atheist, say that they're flat out wrong. I just simply say that they're outside of the realm of things that I'm willing to take a position on. And because the answer doesn't really affect me, or the way I'm going to live my life, I just simply choose not to take a position. Although, if you were to put a gun to my head, I would say, I don't really think there is a God. I don't have a firm conviction for that, but all of the things that I've ever been told about a God, if he exists, don't seem to line up with my version of reality, and maybe that's just me. If you find that's not the way that God is reflected in your reality, if you're sitting here listening to me say these things and you think, oh, I see God every day in my life, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm just saying that's the way I view the world. And so for me, God is almost an irrelevant idea. If you take God to be just his existence, there is a God or there isn't, that's meaningless to me. There's no value in that. If there is a God, or not a God, that doesn't really affect me. It's only when you start to say there's a God and he wants you to behave a certain way or have sex with certain people or not to eat shellfish, at some point that starts to affect me. But, I can't, of all the possible versions of God, I can't, without being able to falsify one or the other, I'm not going to settle on one or the other. I'm just going to simply choose to say, sorry, none of the above. So that's why I choose not to believe in God, and that's why I do choose to believe things like evolution, because evolution has not risen to a better standard, but sort of a more rigorous standard, because evolution, unlike God, is falsifiable, and we haven't been able to falsify it yet, and it accurately reflects everything we know about the biological world. So, as an explanation, it's the best thing we've got so far, and no one's been able to show that it's wrong. If someone comes along and says, hey, I found a way to disprove evolution, and they do it, and someone else comes up with another theory that explains all of life just as well or better, and it can't be falsified, we'll move on to the next thing. Science is not overly dogmatic that way. It's dogmatic in terms of the way it views things and the way it treats phenomenon and the way it goes about logically ordering things, but it's not dogmatic in particular beliefs. So I guess that's probably all I have to say. I've probably gone on for a good 10 minutes here. I could probably go into more detail if I had someone prodding me, but that's pretty much the gist of it. So that's the outlook I'm going to take with me on this podcast. It's the outlook I've had the whole time. It's the outlook I'm going to have going forward. So the person might ask, well, if you find it so irrelevant or whatever, why are you even doing this? Because I find this stuff fascinating. Religion does affect me. Let me just say that. The existence of God may not affect me. Religion does affect me. I have family members who are religious. I have friends who are religious. The Pope wields extraordinary power around the world. The Catholic Church controls a lot of wealth. There's churches all around me in my community members. So religion does affect me. It affects my life. It affects the world I live in. And so I do care about it. And I do happen to find it interesting enough to look at it. And the Bible and the scriptures are certainly fascinating. Even just their history, the fact that they've been around for so long. There's so many different versions. It's interesting stuff just on its own. And of course, religions are interesting too. So that's why I like it. Who can say why they like anything? I don't like baseball. Maybe you do. So I can't say exactly why I like it, but I do. I am interested in it, so hopefully you won't hold that against me. I don't know in terms of Stephen, obviously his outlook is different. Your outlook is going to be different, but that's where I'm coming from. So if maybe there's an atheist out there listening who says, hey, he's not assertive enough, maybe there's a believer out there who says, why the hell is this guy even doing it? I'm just trying to give a little bit more of my perspective to say, when someone comes to me and says, hey, look at Genesis, it says, God created us the way we are, and evolution isn't true, and they try to bring creationism into the school where my son's going to go and sit in the classroom, this is why I care. Because to me, that doesn't line up with the version of reality that I subscribe to.
Is that it? That's open?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing much I can disagree with that. I know. I think the most interesting thing you said there was that science is dogmatic. Whilst I'd certainly agree with that, but obviously there are certain scientists that are extremely dogmatic in the way they believe and the way they see themselves. We could pick up, bring up Richard Dawkins, who is extremely dogmatic in his beliefs and seems to think he can tell everybody what to think and when to think it. It's in a very tyrannical way. Not much different to religions in places. Who are basically, if you don't believe this, then you're going to hell. I know all that stuff.
I totally agree with you, actually, and I think that's another beauty to science, is that in the end, hopefully, the right thing will prevail. There are scientists who falsify data. There are scientists who are dogmatic. And there are problems. These are problems with human beings, I think. And I also acknowledge that in religion. I acknowledge that a lot of problems that happen with religious people are just human problems and not necessarily religion problems. But hopefully no one person in science or no one scientist is going to set the tone forever. I mean, people like Einstein or Newton, as we said, or Gauss, yes, they leave a huge footprint, but that's because everyone else has gone and looked at these things and said, yeah, he's right. It's not because they were able to force it on other people. No one has to listen to Richard Dawkins, and that's the great thing. So if you listen to Richard Dawkins and you don't like what he has to say, because a lot of the things that Richard Dawkins is dogmatic about are not actually scientific. And another thing I would also address is that there's plenty of times. This is why I kind of had a little monologue about what science is and what it can't prove that anything's true. I just saw an article yesterday morning, actually, that tried to say science proves that soda will make kids break your stuff. And it's like they looked at 3,000 families or 3,000 kids, I don't remember, and the kids who had more soda were more destructive or something like that. Well, first of all, that's correlation. And the old phrase, correlation is not causation. But even if it were, that's still not a scientific way to look at the problem. So, Richard Dawkins is a scientist. He's a famous scientist. He has this aura, of science about him. So it can be misused a lot. And that credibility, supposed credibility that comes with his position and his title, I think it can be dangerous because other people can say, well, his opinion is backed by science, and that should never be the case. Richard Dawkins has a lot of opinions. They're just his opinions. Nothing he says about religion is scientific, so you should never take any of his opinions as having any kind of science. He may claim that they do, but his opinions about religion don't have any kind of scientific backing or credibility to them. If you want to believe his opinions, believe them because they speak to you, not because you think that somehow. I would hate to think that someone said, oh, I don't really like what he had to say, but he's a scientist, so that gives some authority. That's completely the wrong way to go. I would never encourage anyone to take something a science said on authority just because they're a scientist. That's ridiculous.
Unfortunately, that is what people do, though. Basically, it's going back to the experiment again of somebody in a lab coat telling you what to do, and people going as far.
My wife. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah,
my wife, she did social sciences in college, and we've talked about this several times, and she's always wanted to tell me it's the Milgram experiment. So I feel like if I don't actually mention the name of it this time, I'm probably going to get beaten for it.
The Novum experiment?
Yeah, the Milgram experiment.
The Milgram experiment.
Yeah. So it has a name.
Milgram.
We've been getting it wrong.
Milgram experiment. Right, okay. But that's not really a problem with science and scientists. It's a problem with humans and our own perceptions and how we ourselves perceive people. Whereas if we all tried to look at everyone as equal, extremely equal, it wouldn't really matter whether it's a science or a scientist saying it. It's whether you yourself can prove that what they've said is true, which I think is what everyone should try to do. It's not just because it's been written in a book or it's been said on TV. You have to go and check things for yourself, or else you're just going on what someone else has said, and that's putting a lot of trust in something that might not be worth putting your trust in.
And it can be really hard when it comes to opinions because and this is what I was trying to say, going back again to the falsifiability. Most opinions can't be falsified. How can you? If I say I don't like baseball, that's not the kind of thing you can test. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you listen to someone else who has an opinion about something more important than baseball, like women's rights or something like that, unfortunately, there is no way to say this person's right and that person's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult. It's one of the hardest things about being alive, really. Honestly, it is. I mean, trying to navigate, navigating, people think science is hard and math is hard, and I guess it is. But at least there's a clear focus, a clear path, and there's clear structure and a clear way of thinking, if you do it right anyway, to help you out. But trying to figure out, humanitarian issues, civil rights issues, any kind of thing, even religious issues. I'm not religious, so I don't run into these problems in my own life, but I know other people do. Which pastor do you believe, or minister, or priest, or whatever your local, you don't have a local religious leader, because you don't do organized religion. But a lot of
Not
people
at all.
do.
They do.
How do you know what to trust? How do I know? What if you move? You know, maybe you have a church and you really, that preacher you have there just really speaks to you, and then you move, and you were at a Baptist church, and of course Baptist church or, you know, whatever, right? I mean, one Baptist church is not going to be the same as the next.
No.
You move to another state for your job or whatever, and then you know, oh, there's several Baptist church. What do you know what I mean? Like, how do you? That's something you have to navigate for yourself, and that's really difficult.
Yeah, very much so.
This person has a book. That person has a book. You know what I mean? And there's always appeals to authority, which is a huge logical fallacy. You know, consensus isn't any better, but it can help a little bit. I mean, I don't think consensus should be used as a means of saying that something is okay, because clearly a lot of things we find abhorrent today, like slavery, had consensus on their side at one point. But I think it's a way to avoid getting scammed. We have a lot of cultural wisdom, like, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You get what you pay for, you know, things like this, that are generally true. They may not be true in every case, but that sort of distilled common wisdom, I think, can help us navigate our lives. But yeah, you definitely have to think it through for yourself. You can't just go on blindly trusting what other people say. Even grandma's wisdom can fail you sometimes.
Yeah, it can. I do actually have one question for you here, Andrew. Which theory of evolution do you subscribe to? As in, do you go through the normal Darwinian and the phyletic gradualism that changes happened slowly over time, or would you go with the thing posturized by Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould in the 1970s called punctuated equilibrium?
I don't think there's really much way you can deny that punctuated equilibrium has happened, but I'm not sure to what extent it happens. You know what I mean? I don't know how violently it happens. Sometimes these time scales that are talked about are short in evolutionary terms, or they're short in the scale of, say, the length of the universe or the length of the Earth that they've been around. But in terms of human time scales, they're very long.
I think one of these for insects was 10 million years.
Yeah, I mean, it's short in some terms, but that's 10 million years is a long time.
Yeah, 10 million years is definitely a long time, according to us.
I also,
the past 6,000 years has been long enough.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, you have stupid things like federal minimum wage. Not that I think that minimum wage is stupid, but the way it's administered is stupid, because it's the same everywhere in the country. And that's ridiculous. The cost of living is different in different places.
Exactly. Yeah, I do agree.
And I think evolution is that way. I think sometimes it can be slow and sometimes it can be fast. I think it really depends on context. What the environment's like. We were watching a great documentary on the Pacific Ocean last week, and they were talking about all these little islands, tens of thousands of islands. Obviously, there's some big famous ones like Hawaii and things, but then there's lots of little ones too. And if you look at how long the island's been around, and you look at how big it is, and you look at sort of when humans arrived and all these kinds of things, and how far apart they are, it's really easy to figure out sort of what the biological diversity is going to be. The bigger it is, the closer it is to a continent, the more recently, or the longer humans have been there, all these factors, the more species there are, the more diversity there is. If an island's small and far away and humans just recently got there, it has very few species, because very few species were able to get there in the first place, and then they didn't really have any competition, so they just didn't change much. But if you have a big island that had a lot of competition is a driving factor. And I think it really does force species to evolve much quicker. If you introduce new predators to an environment, it's going to start changing, because the paradigm has to change, and it has to change rapidly because there's been a drastic change. So when you have drastic changes, that facilitates other drastic changes, I think. Whereas if you have small changes, it facilitates small changes. I don't think the passage of time necessarily by itself really is much of a factor in terms of, it allows more room for changes to happen, but I don't think there's some set rate that evolution happens regardless of all these other factors. But I'm not a biologist. I don't stay at the cutting edge of the theory, and not all biologists agree, as you pointed out when you asked me the question. So, I think that's also another good thing about it, is that we're always working on it. I say we like I'm actually doing it. But people are always working on it, and they're always trying to figure it out and make it a little bit better. So, is that more evidence? The fact that there is a disagreement just goes to show that maybe there's not enough evidence, or maybe there hasn't been enough time to look at it. But there are definitely things like the Cambrian explosion, where you have to say, there's something going on here. There's a lot of species in a relatively short period of time, so maybe punctuated equilibrium is an explanation for that. Maybe it's not, but you need some way to account for it.
We just don't have the evidence whatsoever at the moment, or we may possibly never find any to explain why, over a space of 40 million years, the 40 common philia just all appeared with no sort of historical reason of why these 40 philia would all appear with external limbs and working eyes.
Well, and fossil records are a funny thing, because not many animals get fossilized, especially not fossilized in great conditions. So,
No, which is another issue altogether, isn't it?
So the evidence can be a little spotty.
Yeah, I've been basically trying to find evidence for the evolution of the horse, and trying to I think the best thing people need to sort out is a phylogenetic tree or something, just showing how an animal has evolved, developed or evolved from when they can determine which is the original, or at least the oldest known fossil we have for the start of that to where it is today, and then putting on where the fossils were found. Because there was quite a few fossils mentioned. Problem is trying to find out where all these fossils were found. Basically, I was trying to determine were they all found in the same geological area? Were they spread between another geological area, or were they just fossils found out from all over the place, and somebody just decided, all right, that goes there, that kind of goes there. Trying to find something I thought would be quite simple. Turned out to be was extremely difficult. Yeah. That's just for the horse. I didn't even bother trying to find out anything else. It was just the horse. It's just basically trying to sort out my own phylogenetic tree that I could have and read and look at and then share with people. I think if scientists want people to see things like that, then they need to start helping them. Because I've on the Talk Origins website, and basically the evolution of the horse page they have. It was last updated in 1995.
Yeah,
that's a long time ago.
It's ridiculous. So there's two real problems, I think, and I've seen one of them firsthand a little bit, is that a lot of scientific information winds up being behind a paywall, or it winds up being kept secret somehow. And there's multiple reasons for that, but science is one of those things that unfortunately needs to be patronized, and oftentimes the people who are doing the patroning, that's the word, want to reap the benefits of that. If it's a company, they're going to want to get patents and keep it secret. Only usually when it's the government do they release it, and even then they don't always release it. And also, scientists they're not very good at getting together and sort of coming up with meta-analysis of their own stuff. So maybe you have one guy who's working on horses over here and another guy that's working on something over there. They don't necessarily get together all that often and sort of sort it all out. Museums aren't a bad place, but you need some kind of an aggregator to find all these pieces and get access to all this stuff that an ordinary person can't get access to, and sort of put it together in a coherent manner. It's funny that you mentioned horses, because the last time I was at the Natural History Museum, which was maybe a couple months ago, they had a great exhibit on the evolution of the horse. So I didn't stop and read every word on every plaque because I was there with my son, but and there was a lot of museum to see, but it was there. There was a lot of stuff there, and they had done a good job of sort of putting the pieces together. So it's not as available as it should be, and I think you're absolutely right that if the general public is going to take more of an interest, that kind of stuff needs to be available, which is all the more important. Which is all the more reason why it needs to be available in school. I think this is an excellent place for the government to come in and say, we want strong education, strong science education, good textbooks, good people teaching it, so that by the time a person is an adult, they've had enough exposure that they're ready to go out and navigate on their own. Because I don't see any other solution to fixing... Sorry, I'm not letting you talk much. I don't see any other solution to fixing the problem of, getting that information more available. I don't see those problems fixing themselves. It's still going to be patron problems, and there's still going to be communication problems. So,
well, it's very similar when it comes to biblical studies. There's a reason why my bookcase is overflowing. It's because I can't get the information free. I have to buy a book in order to read it. So basically, people's theories on why something says this and what it should possibly have said, or what it means, and like in the overall scheme of the book that they're talking about. Not all of that stuff is, well, very little of that stuff is free online. I have to buy a book in order to read it, even if I know there's only one chapter in the book I actually want to read. I can't get that chapter for free. And like there are online articles, but again, they're for like journals that you have to pay almost £30 for. Or it's like £25 to read an article. I don't have that kind of money to spend just to read a few things that I want to see, which is one of the reasons why I put everything for free on the website.
I was just going to say that. It's all the more to your credit that you have this policy of making everything available for free online. It's a valuable resource. Maybe not everyone, likes it, but it's you are providing a valuable service there. Mm-hmm. You put a lot of work into it, obviously, and so other people are definitely benefiting from that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the main thing is that I'm not, I don't have like a publicist I'm doing it for, or there's no university backing my research.
Right, it's not your job. It's your, I guess, hobby. Maybe not. Is not strong enough, but
my life's work. That's what it is.
Exactly.
It's not the job I'm paid to do.
Right. That's what I meant.
It's the job I feel that I'm called to do. That it's something that I have to do, no matter what. Well, as you said, either put it in schools or make it available, make it easier to get access to.
Well, how do you feel about the creationism controversy in terms of teaching creationism in school? I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is, but...
well, obviously, teaching creationism in school in a science class is pretty stupid. You can't teach creationism in a science class, as you said, because whether God started life or didn't start life isn't something that can be falsified. It can't necessarily be tested. It could be a case of, I think, therefore I am, or we exist, therefore he does, type thing. But right. Again, the I think, therefore I am is not a scientific method of determining whether something's true or not. Obviously, you can, basically, in a science class, you could say, we don't know why this has happened. Because we don't know why the 40 film appeared within 40 million years, with no historical gradual transitional fossils to show us how they got from simple single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms that resemble animals. So if I remember my science class when they were talking about evolution, it was all given to us like it was complete and utter fact.
Yeah,
we knew absolutely. It was given like it was absolutely everything was known, and that basically this is what all scientists agree on. This is what science says explicitly. There was no from the research that I've seen, it's not quite as cut and dry as that. I mean, it's a theory that can be falsified, can be shown to be true, because we can see it in modern life. We can see it in humans, because your body structure will be different to mine, even though we're both humans. The shape of our heads, the shape of our arms, the shape of our legs are all coloured by not only our parents, but also by the environment that we live in.
Definitely. Yeah, you just look at skin color, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
The complaint that you make is a common one, and I think it's an absolutely valid one. And I think that there's two real reasons for it. The first is that scientists are trying to, I say scientists like it's all scientists, but
science teachers.
Science teachers, they try to push back against these controversies. So I think that maybe they misguidedly think if they slip up and say the truth, because if you go back and listen to what I was saying earlier, it makes it sound like science isn't that great, really. The best we can do is to not falsify something. Doesn't sound all that grand. And you get all these people who say, oh, evolution is just a theory and this kind of thing. And I think they're afraid that if they use language that's maybe a little more appropriate to what they all really think, it's going to be misconstrued and used to dismiss out of hand what they're teaching by people who would rather insert creationism or some other thing instead. And the second reason, I think, is because there's a sort of a organized... I think the other thing I said is more just a lot of people, just a common mindset. But there's also an organized effort to say we want to leave controversy out of the classroom. So when they try to find things to teach, they sort of look for common ground, supposedly, and just try and teach. They kind of, it's always a little bit out of date because they just try and get sort of the stuff that's maybe a couple of years old, but under less scrutiny at the time. And I think they have a desire to present that more factually than maybe it really always is. And also, maybe a third reason is because things change. I mean, that doesn't necessarily go in line with your complaint. They shouldn't be saying that things are facts when they're not facts. But if you get taught one particular theory in school, 10 or 15 years goes by, maybe it got debunked, which in the grand scheme of things is good because it means that we've moved on and realized that something we thought was right wasn't, but it can seem like a betrayal, or it can seem like you were being taught something that was wrong, even though they didn't know it was wrong at the time, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, that definitely makes sense too.
So they really shouldn't be as forceful with making it sound like it's all known and all facts. There's certainly things we don't know, but I think they're afraid to admit that, honestly, because they don't want to leave any room for their enemies, so to speak, the barbarians, the Hessians. They don't want to leave any room for people to get in and discredit them, I guess.
Well, I can see why they do that, but I really don't agree, because I think, open discussion in the classroom is something that should always be going on.
Well, I don't agree either. Let me just say that real quick.
Yeah, it was just a...
I think those are the reasons. I don't necessarily agree with them.
Yeah, well, they're horrible reasons, and they need to rethink them. Because, like I mentioned, punctuated equilibrium, that was hypothesized in 1972. I was only in high school, secondary school, for us between 1997 and 2002. Science classes were every week for 5 years, and and up until a couple of years ago, I'd never even heard of punctuated equilibrium, despite the fact it had been around 14 years before I was even born.
That's very common in science, unfortunately.
Yeah, which I think is the main problem we have, is that the stuff being taught in school isn't up to date.
Oh, sometimes it's embarrassingly out of date. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to go and basically compare the English and the American school system, but if ours is bad,
go ahead.
I don't really want to know how bad your system is, because you have a lot more creationists.
Yes.
In your country, pushing against stuff being taught in classrooms, and but even other religions being taught in classrooms. Basically, if it's not Christian, it doesn't get taught there.
Well, this is why I was saying I think they push back and they don't want to leave any room, because I think polls have shown, I don't know, maybe they haven't done one recently, I really don't look this stuff up with too much regularity, but several polls over a period of time have shown that over half of Americans think that the world is less than 6,000 years old. I mean, these are fundamentalist, by the book, God said it, I believe it type Christians. And these are the parents of like half the kids in school, probably. So there is a huge opposition. So I think that's why. I think because the pushback, the backlash is so great, they feel like they have to. I don't think it's as bad in England, though. I hope not.
No, because I don't think 30 million people in England believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old.
You hope not, right?
Saying that, I do know several people, Christians mainly, who do believe that it is, just 6,000.
Well, that's one of those things. I don't know any atheist or agnostic who thinks the world is 6,000 years old. This is pretty much an exclusive belief among Christians.
It really is, but I would argue that, as I've argued since day one, if you get the drift.
I got you.
Is that is a fault of English translation and misinformation from Christian elite, pastors, priests.
Well, it doesn't even say it, right? It's like someone added up all the years like all the generations. Like, this person was 900 years old. Add that, they got their calculator there, plus, okay, his kid was 400.
He didn't even have a calculator when he was doing that.
Didn't even have a calculator. Did he have an abacus?
Mental arithmetic, so he may have got it wrong. Sorry, I used the subjunctive there. He got it wrong. Okay, he got the dates completely mixed up. But anyway, I'd also say that it's a translational issue that has yet to be rectified, and until it is, unfortunately, we're going to have idiots the world over. Well, even if you rectify the thing in Genesis, you're still going to have idiots the world over, no matter what. It just seems to be a precursor of the human condition. Is that 50% of us will be moronic.
Well, especially if YouTube continues to survive.
Oh.
I read a comment earlier this morning, and someone was replying, and they said, No, you're not allowed to like two things. You have to like one or the other and hate everything else. Otherwise, you're not allowed to be on the internet.
Oh. And I also think that the main issue between evolution and creationism is the translational differences. Because I've mentioned punctuated equilibrium for a reason. Because I would argue that is what Genesis teaches.
Okay.
More or less, it teaches that certain times there were jumps between animals and even plants.
Well, that certainly lines up with what we know. I mean, we have these periods of where a lot of species show up that we didn't know before. So,
And I think one of the main issues is translating day as day, as well, because people and morning and evening is morning and evening. Because people are all right, so it happened within 24 hours. No. It happened over a few million years, a few billion in the case of the first day. It's just that ignorance of the underlying text that doesn't help between science and religion discussions.
I don't want to get us too far off topic. What do you think of Reza Aslan? I haven't read any of his books, but I know that's one of his sticking points, is that you can't read the Bible outside of the culture and when it was written. You have to take these things into cultural perspective, and I'm pretty sure we both agree with that, but I didn't know if you came to some of his similar conclusions.
Reza Aslan, that's the guy who, the thing on Fox News, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And all about a book where he's essentially just regurgitating stuff that was postularized in 1970, because they were discussing the book, his new book, Jesus the Zealot.
Right.
The life and times of Jesus of Nazareth. That's
sounds like a movie trailer,
Yes, that's it. Zealot, the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth, and that was why he was on Fox News, and why the stupid woman said, "You're a Muslim, why are you writing about Jesus?"
Yeah.
What would I say is, why does someone who has basically from what I can see, no background in either Hebrew studies, Greek studies, Bible studies, writing about something like that. It doesn't matter whether he's a Muslim or not. Basically,
it's the credentials that matter.
Basically, if you want to, that's why I don't produce books.
Right.
I don't have the credentials. Well, I'd say my credentials are on the website. If you can find something wrong, let me know. Whether I can translate Greek or not is up on there for you to determine. Unfortunately, when it comes to things like Jesus being a zealot or one of the political uprisers in first century Israel, that was, people were talking about that back when Reza Aslan was being born. He was born in the 70s.
So not really covering any new ground here. And he certainly didn't find new things in the old Hebrew and Greek because, as you say, he doesn't study them.
Yeah, he has no background or anything like that. He does have a couple of PhDs from what I can tell, but none of them in any relevance to what he's written about. It'd be like me writing about evolution.
Yeah.
I'm producing a book of saying this is what it should be. Basically.
This is why I was careful when you asked me a few minutes ago what particular strain of evolution I believe, because I'm not a biologist and I'm not close enough to it, I think, to make too specific or to affirm a very particular version. I just don't know enough. I don't have the credentials to make that kind of a claim, or to believe that kind of a claim, because to me they kind of go hand in hand. If you don't have the tools to make the claim, then how are you deciding whether to accept it or not? I think if you accept a claim without having sort of the authority to make the claim, then you have to reserve some doubt in your own mind.
Yeah. Well, regarding whether you could understand something outside of its cultural background or significance, I'd say no. Especially when we start coming to talk about the New Testament, it's not just going to be the cultural background. It's not going to be the cultural background of the first century CE. It's going to be the cultural background of how far the religion of rabbinical Judaism went back, or Pharisaical Judaism, as it would have been then, especially with the Sadducees, who were another different sect, and they also got the Essenes, which is another different sect. But when we get to the New Testament, we are going to find out that unless we understand the Old Testament, then we're not going to understand anything about the New Testament, because I'd say about 80% of what the New Testament talks about, it's referring back to something back in the Old Testament, or the Tanakh. And when we do the next podcast, we're going to be starting with Mark, which I think that's kind of another issue with Christianity today, is that they probably all read some of the Gospels. Probably wouldn't have read all of them. They would have read some of Paul's letters, but again, not all. And they probably would have bypassed most of the Catholic or the universal epistles of 1 and 2 Peter, James and Jude. And a few people will have read Revelation. More people will have read the Left Behind books.
Yeah.
And think, all right, well, we know all about Revelation now.
And sadly, even more people than that have read 50 Shades of Grey, so...
It's a massive problem of the human race, is that we are all ignorant.
Well, it seems to me that some preachers like to go to the Pauline letters and sort of almost ignore the Gospels, while others don't like to stray from the Gospels at all.
Yeah, something like they're like gospel-centric, or you got Pauline-centric, and it's a case of you can't divide them quite. Even though the different books within a book, you can't really separate them from each other, especially as they're all written by, especially in the New Covenant, they're written by people at least within the first 2 centuries CE. Obviously, the Tanakh Old Testament spans an awful lot longer time period. As far as I'm concerned, I'd say that the punctuated equilibrium evolution is what would coincide with the Genesis account of creation. more than the old Darwin or the neo-Darwinism gradual change.
Now, is that because you have multiple days, which obviously are not 24-hour days, and then in different days you have different types of, plants in one, animals in another? That kind. Is that the basis for that? Is that so you have these punctuated bursts of species growth that correspond with the different,
with the
time
different
periods?
days? Yeah, pretty much. Well, obviously you got the plants, and then obviously you've got the seafaring creatures and the dinosaurs or the great lizards.
And
or
actually, that does line
the
up.
giant sea monsters, or the giant sea monsters, if you want to go with it.
Yeah, giant sea monsters,
As you said, it does line up.
It does line up.
You got plants first, then you got seafaring creatures along with reptiles, then you have birds, and then you have birds along with land animals, and then you also have the 6th day where we've got mammals.
Right, when that's pretty much, that pretty much lines up with
that lines up perfectly with the fossil record.
I haven't checked too recently. Like I said, I'm not a biologist, but the last I remember, it's sort of like there was this going back to competition and evolution. Most of life on Earth is sustained by these like little snails that live in the ocean, the plankton. That like the whales eat and the fish eat and everything. But it's like beneath that, you have algae and stuff. So it's like if you have this, environment, and you have a species and it's doing very well for itself, and it's consuming resources, eventually you get, you sort of max out what the population that can be sustained, right? You can't, the resources can't sustain anymore. So where do you go? Well, you start eating each other, basically. If another creature were to come along that could, eat the natural inhabitants, then they would have a new food source. You're almost creating a new resource somehow by using the old one, and that's the way the whole food chain works. You have sunlight and minerals and stuff. It's used for the plant life, all plant life in the sea and then on land, and then animals small animals eat on that, and those are eaten by bigger animals. They're eaten by bigger animals, and so it's amazing to me that the food chain almost sort of correlates with evolution as well, because the things that are at the bottom of the food chain were the things that came the earliest, and the things at the top of the food chain, like people, came the latest. And that's not a coincidence, really, when you think about it. If you take that view that things are evolving up the food chain, like evolution goes up the food chain, it doesn't go down necessarily. In general, things evolve up the food chain because that's where there's room to go. It's not because humans are better than algae. It's because algae are doing very well. Obviously we're talking about ancestors here, common ancestors, not necessarily the same species of algae or whatever that we have now, but, things evolve up the food chain because that's where there's room for new resources, and new resources require new types of organisms to consume them.
And if you're buried, you end up being eaten by grass, more or less.
Yeah.
Start all over again. And then also this, and this really has nothing to do with anything really, but if you ever find a leaf, take a look at it. It's going to have a pattern on it, a branching pattern. That branching pattern is almost the same as the tree it came off of. And the branching pattern from the tree is almost the same as the pattern of the trees that are around it. Oh, so basically trees in a clump or in a wood will have the same sort of rings on them as well.
Exactly.
Rings and a pattern.
It's those proportions, yeah.
Which would be reflected in the leaf. So you are saying that you can tell the race of a tree from its leaves.
Well, maybe not like this particular species, but if you took and if there's multiple species.
Oh, sorry, you could tell
the shape. You could tell the shape.
You could tell the shape, and then you could say you found a leaf in the middle of the road, and there was two forests on either side, and they were further enough apart that they had different patterns on them. You'd be able to determine which wood that leaf came from.
Yeah. And if there's too much competition, obviously the pattern of the trees is not going to, it's going to be varied. But if you just have basically one kind of tree, it'll also tell you what the pattern of the trees is going to look like in terms of how many there are and how tall they are. That fractal pattern goes all the way, it scales all the way from the leaf all the way up to the whole forest. It's pretty cool.
Isn't the creation of the tree wonderful?
It is. Well, hey, what's that saying? Only God can make a tree?
Only God can make.
Yeah. Right. So going back to what you were saying, or what you needed to say.
So basically, the Genesis account does effectively follow how the fossil record, more or less, pretty exact. And what I like best about the Genesis account is how it says that the earth brought forth these things.
Right, yeah, we had discussed that before, and I think that's really crucial, actually. Yeah. I'm glad that I found that out, because I didn't actually catch that in the few times I'd looked at it before. Because
I remember you showing me the Skeptic's Bible.
Right.
And he has a little note where it says the earth bringing forth. It's like, maybe and there's a little link saying, maybe the Bible isn't so against evolution after all. I thought that was quite good of him, because he has actually noticed it. All right, so it does say the earth brought forth.
I don't want to insult that guy too much. He is a little bit. The Skeptic's Bible is a little bit of an ass, sort of a.
He's definitely an ass.
Yeah, definitely an ass. It's definitely a tongue-in-cheek. It's not a serious kind of a thing at all.
It was just that little thing of maybe, something that I would argue is that it's not as against evolution as creationists would want to make you think. The Hebrew is for that is yatzah. I mean, it's to bring out, to exit, to send forth, to depart, or to deliver. So the earth delivered plants and animals. In the Hebrew Septuagint, it's from the Greek exago. It's a very similar word to produce, bring forth, but it also has something of to release or set free, which I think is a very beautiful way of saying it. The earth released plants. Now the earth released creatures, kind of like in a burst, if you want to say it, like things burst out, as the Cambrian period just kind of show.
And I've heard the argument that, sort of, if you want to call them fundamentalist atheists or skeptics, they will badmouth fundamentalists for the way they view the Bible, but in order to do that, they only ever look at the Bible in a fundamentalist way as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
They rarely take a more nuanced view themselves, so there's never anything good to say, and that's the Skeptic's Bible is a good. Skeptic Bible is a good example of that. Yeah. He doesn't, he takes that sort of easy, low-hanging fruit, look at it in the most idiotic way possible, and then make fun of it sort of approach, as opposed to seeing if there's more there. I mean, obviously, it's easy to say that all the millions of people who believe in who subscribe to a particular religion or believe in God are they all really mentally deficient? I mean. Some of them definitely, yeah, but
basically, the more vocal they are, the more mentally deficient they usually are. Well, that appears to go hand in hand with most things, to be honest.
Well, no one speaks for the moderate, right? I mean, the moderates are voiceless, more or less.
The voiceless majority, the moderates.
I know you don't like the Archbishop of Canterbury, but he seems to have a fairly reasonable, moderate view on things.
It was the previous one more compared to the new one.
Yeah, I don't actually know who the current one is, but
you not know? Oh, you're talking about Rowan.
Has it changed? Has it changed recently?
Yes, he recently retired.
I'm talking about the last one then.
Last one.
Yeah.
Well,
because I saw an interview with him, and it must have been at least 5 or 6 years old. Mm-hmm. So if it's changed since then it would be the last one.
Well, yeah. Well, you see, I find about the Church of England is very, like wishy-washy, wet lettuce. Don't really want to give like a specific say one way or the other. They kind of like a sit on the fence kind of thing.
But since it's the official church, doesn't it kind of have to be that way? I mean, is that because they're responding to pressure to cater to everyone because it's a government-backed institution, or is it because they really just are that way?
Well. Maybe the leaders have to do that because of that, but having come from a Church of England background, I can say it's not just the leaders.
Okay, gotcha.
It's the people within it as well. They're all very well. Revelation talks about people being lukewarm, and that's what I'd say. That they're kind of like they want to try to appease everyone. It's one of those things that they don't want to be any, like specific one way or the other. Whereas I think in certain cases you have to be. There is just one last thing I want to talk about. It's just like a metaphorical theory certain people have regarding the first chapter of Genesis. Not only is it a description of how life came to be, but also kind of like a rundown of the ages of man as well. So you've got 6 days. And in one of the Psalms, I think it's Psalm 89, it specifically says, as David speaking says to Yahweh, to you a day is 1,000 years and 1,000 years is a day. So they take it like, so Genesis, you've got 6 days, but each day corresponds to a 1,000 year period.
Okay.
So like day one, creation of lights, that's like the first 1,000 years of man. Corresponds to the first 1,000 years of man, where basically we all start out and then we all kind of go out, and you got the stories of Adam and Eve, and then Cain and Abel, and then all their generations, and then you've got this next 1,000 years corresponds to day two, which is when the waters were separated, and during day two, or the next 1,000 years of human history, you've got the flood of Noah. So the separated waters is kind of like a metaphorical reference that there would be a flood. And then you've got day three, where plants and stuff are growing up, and that's basically like post-flood, on when we all start making massive cities, like places in Egypt and the rest of Mesopotamia. That's the next 1,000 years corresponding to the day three, and then Day four is when the sun and moon are revealed to the planets. Basically, people argue that this is a metaphorical reference to the Messiah, Jesus, as represented by the sun, and then the moon representing the devil. Being more or less revealed to Earth, and then that corresponds to the next 1,000 years, so the 4,000 years, and the 5,000 year. Which would correspond to day 5. That is where people would argue that is when the evil religions of Roman Catholicism and Islam came about.
So this is not a belief held by Roman Catholics, then?
This is not a belief held by Roman Catholics, not as far as I know. And then obviously that's the fifth day, which corresponds to the reptiles. It corresponds to the reptiles. Reptiles in scripture, reptiles and snakes are symbolisms of the devil. He's called a snake, and obviously you've got the snake in Adam and Eve. And then the 6th day, or the next 1,000 years, which is known as the last 6,000 years, which is the age of man, which is the 6,000 years we are currently in. The 6th 1,000 years that we are currently in.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's certainly interesting. I mean, you can kind of see how that lines up. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, obviously I don't buy it, but no. Sounds like you don't either.
No, not particularly. I think it kind of makes a little bit of sense, but it doesn't quite add up as far as I'm concerned. So it's a very nice...
It's another one... it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, maybe not, but it has its own sort of internal beauty, like most things like that do, where you have sort of a compact version in the first 6 days of what's to come. Yeah. But whether that was intentional or not, does it really, you know what I mean? It's like, does it make any real difference? Maybe if there was a 7th day...
There is a 7th day.
Well, there is a 7th day, but if there was a 7th day where things happened, I mean, is that interpreted as, if there was a day...
Day 7 is interpreted as...
the rapture, maybe?
Post-rapture, actually.
Post-rapture, I see.
It corresponds to the 1,000 years of the Messiah's rule after he returns.
I was going to say, because it only really seems to matter other than just for its own implicit, value. If there's an extra day where it's making predictions about what's to come.
Yeah, well, in the Book of Revelation, which we've not got to, it talks about a 1,000-year reign of the Messiah. People would argue that corresponds to day 7, where God takes a rest from all his work.
The reign of the Messiah. It sounds like a bad comic book, Jesus and the reign of the Messiah. DC Comics.
It'd be the best DC comic for a while. Anyway, so yeah, no, that was the last thing.
Yeah, you always got to be careful of that stuff because it's always easy in hindsight to say these things. I mean, that has its own internal structure according to other things in the Bible, but you always got to be careful. A lot of Nostradamus people and stuff like that. Yeah, they always go back in hindsight and say, well, they're always wrong so far, but it's always easy to go back and say, well, this matched this and this matched this, and it's like, you can't do it that way. Either the prediction works or it doesn't. You can't go back and say, well, in hindsight, this is what I meant to say. I'm going to leave the details out until after it's happened. After it's happened.
It's reading stuff into things that probably weren't meant to be there, and it's just something you're reading into it, or trying to make it fit.
Okay, well, all right. I guess that just about wraps it up then. Please stay tuned next time for episode 8 when we take a look at Mark. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
We're going to start our in tandem. We're going to start our series on the New Testament. I've been your host Andrew, and your co-host Stephen.
Goodbye.
All right, thanks for listening, and have a great day. We'd like to thank SacJoe22 for releasing her version of A Prayer under the Creative Commons 3.0 license, which allowed us to use it in our podcast. If you'd like to find more music by SacJoe22, visit ccmixter.org/files/SacJoe, SACKJO22/36192. And for more information about the Creative Commons 3.0 license, visit creativecommons.org/licenses/by-nc/3.0. Thank you.